A man in his early 30s walks into his billionaire grandfather's will reading and watches his family collect millions. Then his name is called and he's handed $50. His dad smiles like something's just been proven. His brother laughs out loud right in front of him. The humiliation isn't the number. It's the message in this family: some people get respect and some people are born to be reduced. People say money doesn't change you, it just reveals you faster. So when you're cut down in public like that, what's the right move? Stay quiet to keep the peace, or step out of the victim role and force the truth into the open? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Now, let's hear him out. I arrived a few minutes early, like I always did. Not because punctuality was some proud virtue in our family, pardon the joke, but because showing up early gave me something I rarely got when I was around them: space to breathe. The law office sat in Savannah's historic district, tucked behind a row of restored brick buildings that looked charming from the outside and cold on the inside. Everything in that office was meant to make you feel measured. Polished wood that swallowed fingerprints. Frosted glass that blurred outlines but never let you forget someone was watching. Leather chairs lined up with perfect symmetry, as if the room itself had decided who belonged where. I took the seat farthest from the head of the table without thinking. It was muscle memory, years of learning how to fold myself smaller so nobody could accuse me of taking up too much. From where I sat, I could see the chair at the front like it was a throne. That chair had always belonged to my father, even when he wasn't in it yet. I let my eyes travel the room the way my grandfather had taught me, not looking for drama, looking for truth. What was too new? What was too clean? What didn't fit? The air smelled like copy paper and expensive cologne that clung to the walls long after someone left. The overhead lights were unforgiving, bright enough to reveal every detail, harsh enough to make you want to look away. Then the door opened and my family filed in like they'd rehearsed it. My father, Clay Rook, walked straight to the head of the table and sat down as if the seat had been waiting for him. He didn't glance my way. He didn't need to. In his mind, I'd already been placed. My mother, Vivian, followed and sat beside him, spine straight, hands folded, her expression composed in that particular way she saved for public moments, concern carefully measured, nothing too messy. My brother Brett came in last, relaxed, confident. A faint smile already sitting on his mouth, like he knew how the ending would read before the lawyer even opened the folder. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was holding up. I didn't take it personally. That would have required me to still be surprised by it. The lawyer, Holt Merrick, entered a moment later with a thin folder and a thicker calm. He was the kind of man who could deliver life-altering news with the same tone you'd use to read a grocery list. He nodded once, sat down, and opened the folder as if we were about to discuss quarterly earnings. "We are here," he said, voice even, "to read the last will and testament of Warren Rook." My grandfather's name landed in the room, and for a split second the silence shifted. Not softened, not warmed, just rearranged. Like the room acknowledged power, even after death. Holt cleared his throat, turned a page, and began. The first name was my father's. Clay Rook Holt read a total inheritance of $5 million. I watched my father's shoulders loosen as if he'd been carrying a weight and finally set it down. The satisfaction crossed his face for half a heartbeat, quick and controlled, then vanished behind a solemn nod. In public, my father never celebrated. He simply received what he believed was owed. Next came my mother. Vivian Rook Holt said $3 million. My mother exhaled slowly, like someone who'd been holding her breath through an entire exam. Her fingers found my father's hand beneath the table, and he let her hold it as if the gesture cost him nothing. Then my brother, Breck Rook Holt, read $2 million. Breck didn't even pretend. His smile widened. He leaned back in his chair, glanced in my direction, and raised his eyebrows like he was waiting to see whether I'd crack. I stared down at my hands. I reminded myself of the promise I'd made in the car on the way here. Don't expect anything. Don't hope. Hope is how you end up humiliated twice, once by them and once by yourself. Holt turned the page. And Stellan Rook. The room sharpened. Not because anyone cared about me, but because my name was a final step in the process. A check mark. A formality before everyone could leave and start planning what to do with their money. For Stellan Rook, Holt said the sum of $50. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard. I waited for the rest of the sentence. $50 plus $50, along with $50, paired with something that made it make sense. But Holt didn't add anything. Just 50. Not 50,000. Not a symbolic check. Not a sentimental object with a little speech about memories. $50, two crisp bills slid across the polished table toward me like an afterthought. Breck laughed out loud. It wasn't even a laugh that tried to be subtle. It was the kind of laugh people give when they think the moment belongs to them. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "That's poetic." Someone else made a quiet sound, maybe a chuckle, maybe a cough. Chairs shifted. The room buzzed with that low, polite relief people get when they've just watched someone else take the hit instead of them. My father smiled. Not big, not open, just a small contained curve of his mouth that told me everything he believed. The kind of smile that said, "See, I told you." The kind of smile that said Dad knew who mattered. This proves something my father said lightly, like he was commenting on the weather. Dad always knew who was practical and who wasn't. My mother didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the table as if eye contact might make her responsible for what was happening. I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't demand an explanation. My silence wasn't noble. It wasn't even strategic at first. It was automatic, trained into me over years of being described as the easy one. The low-maintenance one. The one who didn't ask for much. What they really meant was the one who won't cause trouble. Holt slid a pen toward me. "Please sign here." Professional. Neutral. Like my name belonged on a receipt. I picked up the two bills. They were new. Too new. Flat clean, almost stiff. They didn't feel like cash that had lived in anyone's wallet. They felt prepared, selected, delivered. And my grandfather, Warren Rook, had never been careless. Not with business, not with numbers, not with people. He built his empire on details. He used to say the world didn't run on loud declarations. It ran on quiet systems. I held the bills for a moment longer than I should have. The overhead light struck the paper at a certain angle and something caught. A tiny mark. So faint it could have been a scratch if you weren't looking for it. A thin line near the serial number. Not a stain. Not wear. Not random. My pulse shifted one beat heavier than another. I tilted the bills again. The mark stayed exactly where it was, like a deliberate decision. And suddenly a memory rose up so clearly it felt like my grandfather was standing beside me. If you want to hide the truth he'd told me once, put it where no one bothers to look. My throat tightened. The humiliation in the room didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being a dead end and started feeling like a door I hadn't noticed. I folded the bills carefully, too carefully for something worth $50, and slid them into my wallet like they were evidence. "I think we're done here," I said quietly. No one stopped me. My father didn't look up. My mother stayed still. Breck laughed again behind me, lighter this time, like the moment had been successfully completed. I walked out of the law office into the late Savannah afternoon, the air heavy and warm against my face. The street outside was all brick and ironwork and tourists drifting by with iced drinks, unaware that my family had just reduced me to 2 bills in a cold room upstairs. I got into my car in the parking garage beneath the building. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing. $50. Most people would have shoved it into a pocket and tried to forget the feeling. Some people would have torn it up. Some people would have thrown it back at them. I didn't do any of those things. I took the bills out again. Grandpa Warren had taught me to look closer. Not because it made you paranoid, because it made you hard to fool. I smoothed the money across my lap and angled it under the dim garage light. There it was again, 2 separate marks, one on each bill. And when I leaned in, I saw something that made my stomach turn with certainty. A few digits in the serial number looked touched, not altered, gently underlined, almost invisible unless you knew where to focus. This wasn't damage. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. He had done this. The idea moved through me like cold water. My grandfather hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me something people wouldn't bother to read. I started the car and pulled out of the garage without going home first. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, but my mind felt strangely clear. There was only one place in Savannah where my grandfather's name still carried weight without needing a title. The old bank he'd used for decades. And if those marks meant what I suspected they meant, then $50 wasn't my inheritance. It was the key. Savannah Heritage Bank sat downtown in a building that looked like it had been there before the city decided what it wanted to become. Tall ceilings, marble floors, brass details polished so often they looked new even when they weren't. Everything about the place told you the same thing: voices stay low here, and so do secrets. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. Cooler, cleaner. The faint smell of paper and polish. People spoke softly at the counters, as if loudness itself would be considered suspicious. I approached the front desk and waited until the receptionist looked up. Her smile was practiced, pleasant, but distant. "I need to speak with the branch manager," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's about my grandfather, Warren Rook." Her expression shifted, not into shock, not curiosity, something closer to recognition, like a name that came with instructions. "One moment, please," she said, already reaching for the phone. While she spoke in a low voice, I stood there and watched the lobby. A man in a suit sat with his hands clasped, eyes on the floor. A teller counted bills with the kind of calm you only get when your job is accuracy, not speed. A security guard glanced my way once, then looked away, uninterested but aware. The receptionist hung up and offered a polite nod. "Mr. Langford will see you. Please follow me." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask which Warren Rook. She didn't ask anything at all. She led me down a hallway that felt quieter than the lobby, the carpet muffling footsteps. At the end was a door with frosted glass and a nameplate, "Langford Branch Manager." She knocked once and opened the door. Mr. Langford stood as I entered. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that didn't waste expressions. He offered his hand. "Mr. Rook," he said. "Not sir, not Stellan, just my last name like a file." I shook his hand and sat when he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. His office looked like a place built for control. Everything aligned. Nothing personal. The desk surface was clean except for a small lamp and a thin stack of documents arranged precisely. "How can I help you?" he asked. I didn't give myself time to doubt. I pulled my wallet out, took out the 2 bills and placed them on his desk. "These were left to me in my grandfather's will," I said. $50. And I think he marked them. For the first couple seconds, Mr. Langford's expression didn't change. He looked down at the money the way a professional might look at something a grieving person brought in because they needed the world to make sense. Polite, slightly indulgent. Then his eyes narrowed. He lifted the first bill, turned it slightly, brought it closer to the lamp. He checked the serial number. He tilted the paper. His gaze moved to the exact place where the tiny mark sat. And then he stopped moving. Not the way someone pauses to think. The way someone pauses because they've just seen something they didn't expect to see, something that changes the rules. The color drained from his face so quickly it startled me. "Where did you get these?" he asked, and his voice had changed. Lower. "Careful. You already know," I said. "From Warren Rook." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to the office door and closed it. Then he turned the lock. The click sounded loud in the quiet. He returned to his chair and sat down again, but the posture was different now. His shoulders weren't relaxed. His attention wasn't casual. It was focused, almost respectful. "These markings," he said, slowly looking at the bills again, "are not a coincidence." My mouth went dry. "What are they?" Mr. Langford held the bills side by side and aligned them as if he were matching a pattern. "They're a verification sequence," he said. "A kind of proof. Proof of what I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, steady but hard." He looked up at me for a long moment like he was deciding how much truth I could handle in one sitting. "If I'm right," he said, "you're the only person who could have brought these to me." I blinked. Why, he set the bills down gently, almost carefully, and folded his hands on the desk. "Because your grandfather left something outside the will," he said. The sentence landed like a weight. Outside the will meant outside the room where my father smiled and my brother laughed. Outside the official story everyone thought they owned. Mr. Langford reached for a file drawer and pulled out a thin folder. He didn't open it yet. He simply rested his hand on it as if touching it required permission. "Before we go any further," he said, "I need to confirm your identity." I nodded, hands slightly unsteady, as I handed him my ID. He examined it, typed something into his computer, and waited for the screen to respond. For a second, his face went still again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was recognition, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. He looked back at me, and the respect in his eyes was unmistakable now. "It's exactly as he said," he murmured. "As who said?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandfather," he replied. He opened the folder at last, revealing a document with my grandfather's name printed at the top and a set of instructions below it. The language was precise, controlled. The kind of writing you use when you expect people to try to bend the truth. "There's a private deposit box here," Mr. Langford said, "registered solely to Warren Rook. It exists outside probate, separate from the will entirely. We were instructed not to disclose it to anyone." My stomach tightened. Unless someone came with proof," he said, and he tapped the two bills lightly with one finger. These markings were part of a system he designed himself. He believed numbers tell the truth if you know how to read them. That sounded like my grandfather so perfectly it almost hurt. Mr. Langford leaned back slightly. "If you choose to proceed," he said, "I can take you to it. But once we open that door, there are protocols, paperwork, protections. Your grandfather was very clear." Outside, the city moved on. Tourists wandered. Cars passed. People laughed in the distance. Inside this office, the air felt charged, like the room had become a sealed container for a truth no one else was meant to touch. I looked at the bills on his desk, the same $50 my family had laughed at. And for the first time since the will reading, the cold, hollow feeling in my chest shifted into something else. "Focus. Take me to it," I said. Mr. Langford's expression didn't soften, but he nodded once, as if he'd been waiting to hear those exact words. "Very well," he said. "Let's begin." "Very well," Mr. Langford said. "Let's begin." He didn't rush. He didn't gesture dramatically. He moved the way people move when every step has a procedure attached to it. He gathered my ID and a couple of forms from his desk, then opened a drawer and removed a keyring that looked too plain for what it represented. "Walk with me," he said. The hallway outside his office felt colder than the lobby, like the building saved its true temperature for the places where money stopped being money and became something else: records, obligations, leverage. Our footsteps were soft on the carpet, swallowed before they could echo. He nodded to a security camera in the corner as we passed, not performing for it, just acknowledging it like you would a person you worked with every day. We reached a door that didn't look like much until you stood close enough to notice what it was made of. Steel beneath paint. A keypad set flush into the frame. A small scanner with no label. The kind of door you wouldn't even register if you weren't told to look for it. Mr. Langford paused and looked at me. "Before we go in," he said, "I'm going to verify you again. This is not personal. It's protocol." "I understand," I said, though my throat was dry. He compared my face to my ID like a man who'd been trained to trust documents only after he trusted his own eyes. He entered a code on the keypad, then used one of the keys. There was a soft mechanical sound, something precise, unlocking something heavier than it appeared. Then he pressed his thumb to the scanner. A small green light blinked. The door released with a quiet click that felt loud in my chest. When it opened, a breath of air rolled out that smelled faintly metallic and clean, like chilled stone and paper sealed away from time. The corridor beyond was narrow and bright, the lighting sharper than upstairs. The temperature dropped a few degrees. I could feel it on my forearms. The walls were plain, almost sterile, as if decoration would be an insult to what this space existed to protect. "This box," Mr. Langford said as we walked, "is registered solely to Warren Rook. It's separate from the will, separate from the estate process." That was his instruction. He wanted it outside the usual channels. Outside the usual channels. The phrase should have sounded technical, but it landed like a sentence about my family. About the room where my father smiled and my brother laughed. About the stage they thought was the only stage. We stopped at a second door, thicker, heavier. Mr. Langford entered another code, used another key, then pulled a handle with controlled force. The door opened into a secure room lined with rows of metal boxes, each with its own lock, each one a sealed promise. He didn't lead me in like a tour guide. He led me in like a witness. He walked to a section near the back, unlocked a box with a key he carried on the ring, then slid it out with both hands and set it on a small table. He opened it and stepped back half a pace, giving me space, like this wasn't just money, it was something intimate. I wasn't prepared for how ordinary it looked at first. Not ordinary as in cheap. Ordinary as in organized. Neat. Intentional. Gold bars sat in a row, wrapped and stacked with the kind of care that made my stomach tighten. Next to them were folders thick, labeled clean. Names of companies I recognized from headlines. Investment documents, bonds, account statements, cleanly clipped and arranged. There were also envelopes, some sealed, some not, each one placed where it belonged, like my grandfather had packed this box the way he packed his life, with systems that didn't depend on anyone else. My first feeling wasn't joy. It wasn't even disbelief. It was the sick, quiet realization that he had seen farther than any of us, farther than the funeral, farther than the will reading, farther than the moment my father smiled. He'd built this to outlive every conversation we'd ever have about him. Mr. Langford watched me without staring. "This is," he said carefully, "approximately $32 million. I blinked like I'd misunderstood the unit of measurement. Conservatively, he added. My knees felt weak, not because I suddenly pictured mansions or cars, but because the number was so large it didn't feel like a gift, it felt like weight, like responsibility, like something that would change the way every person in my family looked at me if they ever found out. And then I saw it. On top of everything, above the gold, above the folders, was a plain cream envelope. No bank stamp, no official seal. Just my name written across the front in a familiar hand. Stellan. It hit me harder than the money. That handwriting was my grandfather's voice. Black coffee. Tight notes on yellow paper. The pause he used before he said something that mattered. My hands started to shake as I reached for it. Mr. Langford lifted a palm slightly, not stopping me, just marking the moment. "We were instructed," he said softly, "that no one opens that. Not ever. Not even us. Unless the person who came had proof." He nodded toward the 2 bills that were no longer in my wallet. They were in his possession, now logged and protected as part of whatever system my grandfather had built. I swallowed and sat down in the chair beside the table because my legs didn't trust themselves. I broke the seal. The paper inside was folded neatly, like he'd taken his time. Like he knew I would take mine. "My dear Stellan, if you're reading this, it means you saw what everyone else would have missed. That already tells me I was right." My vision blurred fast. I pressed my thumb to the edge of the page, willing myself to keep reading. "I gave you $50, not because that's what you deserved, but because I needed you to see the truth with your own eyes." I exhaled through my nose, shaky, almost angry at how cleanly he could cut through me even from beyond the grave. "Money doesn't change people, it just removes the mask faster." I could hear him saying it. Not like a slogan, like a diagnosis. "I wanted you to watch who smiled, who laughed, who stayed silent while you were diminished. Those reactions matter more than any speech at a funeral." My chest tightened. In the cold law office, my father's smile flashed in my mind. Breck's laugh. My mother's eyes on the table. The way the lawyer slid the bills to me like a receipt. "You were the only one who stayed when there was nothing to gain. You didn't ask. You didn't push. You didn't perform. That is why I trust you." Tears slid down my face before I could stop them. I didn't wipe them right away. I let them fall because nobody in that secure room was judging me for being human. The money in this box is not a reward. It is a responsibility. Protect yourself with it. Build a life that doesn't require you to beg for respect. And when they come, and they will remember this love that depends on money was never love to begin with. I read that line twice. My throat closed on the second pass. Then the last sentence written with the same steady hand. Don't make yourself small again. I sat there for a moment with the letter pressed against my chest as if I could feel his heartbeat through the paper. The cold room around me didn't feel cold anymore. It felt exact. Like everything was finally placed in the right order. Mr. Langford cleared his throat gently, giving me the space to come back to the present without yanking me out of it. Your grandfather also left legal instructions, he said. If you choose to proceed, we can establish protections immediately. A trust structure, private, shielded, controlled only by you. I looked up. He planned this. Mr. Langford nodded once. He was very specific. He reached into the box again and removed a set of documents separate from the investment folders. These weren't statements. They were instructions, typed, signed, dated. The language was sharp and plain, like my grandfather didn't trust poetic interpretations. Mr. Langford laid them on the table and pointed to the key areas as he spoke. An anonymous trust, he said. Assets transferred into it. Only you can authorize distributions. No one can touch it without your consent. It also includes protections against coercion against anyone pressuring you, cornering you, threatening you. My jaw tightened. My family. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. There's also a clause addressing disputes, he continued. Your grandfather anticipated challenges. He built in safeguards to discourage them. Safeguards. Disincentives. My grandfather's way of saying I know what they are. I know what they'll do. Mr. Langford watched my face as if he could see the same realization settling in. This wasn't meant to be announced at the will reading, he said quietly. The will reading was public. This is private. This is yours. The word yours felt strange, like a coat I'd never been allowed to try on. I folded the letter carefully back into the envelope and held it like something fragile and indestructible at the same time. I looked down at the gold bars again, the labeled folders, the clean stacks of paper. My grandfather had left my father and brother money they could celebrate openly. He left me something else, something that demanded I grow a spine strong enough to carry it. Mr. Langford slid the legal instructions into a separate envelope and sealed it. We'll take this step by step, he said. You don't have to decide everything today. But I do recommend you speak with the attorney your grandfather named. It would be wise. Wise. That was another word my family had never used about me. Easy. Sweet. Quiet. Those were my labels. I stood carefully still, unsteady, and took one last look at the box before Mr. Langford began to secure it again. I didn't ask to touch the gold. I didn't ask to count anything. The number wasn't what made my hands shake. It was the clarity. Back upstairs, as we walked toward his office, I felt as if I was carrying two different realities at once. The one my family knew Stellan with $50 and a silent face, and the one my grandfather had carved out for me Stellan with a key in his pocket and a door behind him that only he could open. By the time we reached Mr. Langford's office again, I understood something that made my stomach sink. If my grandfather planned this so carefully, then he also knew exactly what would happen when the wrong people caught the scent of it. I left the bank with the truth in my hands, and the consequences already moving toward me. Mr. Langford didn't let me walk out like a regular customer closing an account. He sat me down again, poured a glass of water I didn't touch, and pulled the two $50 bills from a sealed pouch, as if they were evidence in an investigation. He turned on a small device on the side of his desk, one of those tools designed to reveal what the naked eye misses. I know you've already shown me the marks, he said, voice measured. But your grandfather's system requires confirmation on our end. It's part of the chain. He laid the bills under the light, examined the serial numbers again, and entered them into his computer. I watched the cursor move across the screen. watched him cross-reference something that clearly existed long before I walked into the bank. The moment felt surreal. An hour ago, I was still the man who left a law office with 2 bills and a laugh behind him. Now I was watching a bank manager validate my grandfather's secret like it was a standing appointment. Mr. Langford nodded to himself once. "Okay," he said. He printed something, signed it, and placed it in a file folder with my name on the tab. Then he looked at me with the same careful respect as earlier. "There's something else," he said. "When that box was accessed today, another step triggered automatically." My shoulders tensed. "What step?" "A notification," he replied. "Not to your family. Not to anyone listed in the will. A private alert to a legal contact your grandfather designated. It's already been sent." My pulse spiked. "Who?" He hesitated like names mattered in rooms like this, then answered. "Adair Keene." I didn't recognize it. "She's an estate and trust attorney," he added. "Savannah. Your grandfather worked with her on contingency planning. She's discreet. She understands protective structures." Protective structures. My grandfather's words translated into someone else's mouth. Mr. Langford opened a drawer and removed a second envelope. This one wasn't from the box. It looked like it had lived in his office for a long time waiting. It was sealed, thick paper. My name written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting again. Stellan. Beneath my name in smaller letters, a simple instruction. Only open if they start pressuring you to split it. My mouth went dry. "I was instructed to give you this after the first access," Mr. Langford said. "Not before. Not later." I took the envelope like it might buzz with electricity. He really believed they'd come. Mr. Langford didn't answer the way people answer when they're guessing. He answered like someone repeating a known fact. He was certain, he said. He gathered the bills again and sealed them away, then sat back in his chair. His gaze stayed on me, not unkind but direct. "One more thing," he said, "and I'm going to be very careful with my wording." I waited. "Are you sure," he asked, "that you're the first person to come here with questions about this?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Mr. Langford held my eyes. "A few days after your grandfather passed, he said someone came in. Not with these bills, not with proof, but with interest. They asked about private holdings. They asked whether there were any boxes or accounts outside the will." I felt a cold line form down my spine. "Who I'm not at liberty to disclose names without a formal request," he said. "But I can tell you this, they were denied. Completely. They left frustrated." My mind flashed to the hospital room, the way my father checked his watch, the way Breck stood near the door, the way they all seemed busy but never stayed long. I'd thought they were avoiding discomfort. I'd thought they didn't want to sit with dying. Maybe they were simply already looking for the exit routes. Mr. Langford's voice lowered slightly. "Your grandfather designed the verification marks because he believed people would try to force their way in." I stared at the sealed envelope in my hands. The paper suddenly felt heavier than gold. I left the bank not with celebration, but with a new awareness the truth didn't sit quietly. It drew attention. And the kind of attention my family carried didn't stop at polite boundaries. Down in the parking garage, the air was warmer and smelled faintly of exhaust. I sat in my car with the engine off and pressed the envelope against my thigh as if keeping it close would keep it safe. I took a slow breath, then another. And then my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It vibrated again. Another unknown number. Then again. Like someone was casting a wide net, hoping I'd bite out of sheer irritation. A message appeared. Not a vague rumor, not a sloppy guess. "We know about the box. Over $30 million. Stop playing innocent. Call back." My stomach dropped. Another message followed from a different number. "Trust. Deposit box. You really think you can keep it all?" My fingers went cold around the phone. My first instinct was to look around the garage as if the person texting might be standing behind a pillar watching me read. I didn't see anyone. That didn't help. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the steering wheel until the leather grain came into focus. My grandfather's voice floated up again, calm and clean. When they come, and they will remember this. So the clock had started, and it was moving faster than I would have chosen. I drove home, but I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car for a few extra minutes and watched the street like I'd suddenly become someone who needed to. The calls kept coming. Voicemails stacked up without words. Some were silent. Some had breathing. One had a faint laugh before it cut off. It wasn't just curiosity, it was pressure. I went upstairs and locked my door, then placed the sealed envelope on my kitchen table, as if it were a live thing. My apartment looked the same as it had that morning, modest, quiet mine. But the air inside it felt different, like the walls had started listening. I didn't call my father. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Breck. Not because I was brave. Because I knew that if I called even once, I'd be back in the old pattern, explaining, apologizing, shrinking. And the second I started shrinking again, they'd remember exactly how to handle me. Instead, I called Mr. Langford. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Rook. My phone won't stop, I said. Someone knows. They know too much. There was a brief pause. I assumed this might happen, he said carefully. Your grandfather anticipated leakage. That's why the alert went out. To Adair Keene, I said. Yes, he replied. If you haven't spoken to her yet, I recommend you do so immediately. I hung up and searched the name. The number came up quickly. I hesitated only long enough to listen to my own breathing. Then I called. A woman answered, voice calm, precise. Adair Keene. My name is Stellan Rook, I said. Warren Rook was my grandfather. Mr. Langford said you'd be expecting I am. She cut in gently, not rude, just efficient. Can you come in tonight? I'd rather not do this over the phone. Yes, I said. Tell me where. Her office was in a renovated building not far from the courthouse clean lines, warm, lighting the smell of fresh paper and black coffee. Not cozy in a sentimental way, cozy in a controlled way, like everything here existed to keep messy people from getting inside your head. Adair Keene was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed hair pinned back, the kind of person who didn't waste time trying to charm you. She listened as I laid everything out on her desk, the letter from my grandfather, the documents Mr. Langford had provided, and finally the two $50 bills which I'd been allowed to carry only after they were logged. When I showed her the faint markings, she didn't gasp. She didn't smile. She simply nodded like she'd seen my grandfather's fingerprints in decisions like this before. He built an identification mechanism into currency, she said almost to herself. That's very Warren. I swallowed. My family already knows there's money. They're calling from different numbers. They're circling. Adair didn't look surprised. She opened the legal packet and scanned quickly, then looked up. Your grandfather didn't just leave you assets, she said. He left you insulation. Insulation, I repeated. A structure that keeps people from forcing you into a corner, she said. Anonymous trust options. Consent controls. Protection language against coercion. And this matters, there's a dispute clause tied to the inheritances your father, mother, and brother received. I leaned forward. What kind of clause? She held my gaze. If they attempt to challenge certain aspects or pressure outcomes through legal action in specific ways, they risk triggering consequences that can restrict or redirect what they received. It's designed to make bullying expensive. My heart beat harder, not out of excitement, but out of understanding. My grandfather didn't want me to win an argument. He wanted me to survive the kind of people who treat family like a weapon. Adair slid my grandfather's letter back toward me. He set the stage at the will reading for a reason, she said. He wanted you to see how they behave when they think you're powerless. And he wanted them to reveal themselves before they knew the truth. I thought of my father's smile, Breck's laugh, my mother's eyes on the table, the room full of quiet chairs and whispered relief. I nodded slowly. So what do I do now? Adair tapped the documents. We move first, she said. We formalize protections. We don't wait until they show up at your door, because they will. The words landed, and almost on cue my phone buzzed again on the desk between us. Unknown number. I didn't pick it up. Adair watched the screen light up, then looked at me like she was making a decision. "Go home," she said. "Lock your door. Don't engage. If they contact you, you document. If they come in person, you don't let them push you into a private conversation without counsel." I left her office with my grandfather's letter in my jacket pocket and a new folder in my hands, one that felt like the beginning of a wall I'd never been allowed to build before. By the time I reached my apartment, it was fully dark. The hallway outside my door was quiet in that late evening way, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel like a warning. Inside, I set my keys on the table and tried to breathe like a normal person. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. I took one step toward the kitchen to pour myself water. That's when the knock came. Not polite, not tentative. 3 sharp hits, fast and impatient, like the door owed someone an answer. My body went still. I walked to the door without turning on extra lights. I leaned in and looked through the peephole. A familiar stance filled the framed shoulders, squared weight set forward, the posture of someone who never knocks unless he expects to be let in. And behind him, just off to the side, a second figure shifted, too comfortable to be a stranger. My stomach tightened as my hand hovered over the deadbolt. They hadn't even waited for me to process the truth. They'd come to collect it. I stood on the other side of the door for a full second after seeing them through the peephole, long enough to register the familiar posture, long enough to understand that whatever was about to happen, it wasn't a visit. It was a claim. I unlocked the door. I didn't say a word before my father stepped forward and crossed the threshold as if my apartment were an extension of something he already owned. His eyes swept the space immediately, walls, furniture, the narrow kitchen, the small table by the window, like an inventory check. My mother followed, lips pressed together in that practiced expression of concern she used when she wanted credit for feeling something without having to choose a side. Breck stayed near the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, arms crossed, watching me like I was the evening's entertainment. No one asked to come in. No one waited to be invited. "Still living small," my father said, glancing around. Interesting. It wasn't an observation. It was a judgment, a reminder. In his mind, my modest apartment was proof that I had never really belonged in my grandfather's world. Breck laughed softly. "Guess $50 doesn't stretch very far these days." I closed the door behind them and locked it. Not because I thought it would stop anything, but because the sound grounded me. A clean click. A boundary, even if it was only symbolic for now. "Why are you here?" I asked. My father turned toward me slowly, as if surprised I'd spoken at all. "Don't act like you don't know," he said. "We need to talk." "Talk." Breck echoed, grinning. "That's generous." I stayed where I was, near the kitchen counter, keeping distance between us without making it obvious. I kept my voice even. Calm wasn't kindness. Calm was defense. "If you're here about the will," I said, "there's nothing to discuss." My father scoffed. "Don't insult us," he said. "We know about the account." The word landed heavy. The box, he continued, watching my face closely. "The trust structure. Roughly 30 million, give or take." There it was. Not a guess, not a rumor, not curiosity. Information. My chest tightened, but my expression didn't change. Inside, something rearranged itself. This wasn't them coming to feel me out. This was them confirming leverage. My mother stepped closer, her voice softer. "Honey," she said, reaching for my arm. I shifted just enough that her hand missed me. She didn't comment on it. "This doesn't have to turn into something ugly. We're family. Family." The word had weight in her mouth. It always did. She used it like a net. "Your grandfather always said he wanted to take care of everyone," she continued. "You know that. He would hate seeing us divided like this." I watched her fingers hover in the air for a second before she lowered her hand. The gesture wasn't comfort. It was ownership. Breck rolled his eyes. "Let's skip the sermon," he said. "You got lucky. Good for you. Now don't be selfish about it." "Lucky." I let out a slow breath through my nose. "You didn't come here to congratulate me," I said. "You came here to take control." My father's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone," or what I asked quietly. The room shifted. just slightly. The balance they were used to wasn't sitting where it normally did. My father took a step closer. You don't get to rewrite history because you stumbled into something you don't understand. That money, those assets, they're part of a legacy. And legacies are shared. I looked at him for a long moment. Then why did you smile when I was handed $50 silence? Breck's smirk faltered. My mother looked away. I'm asking a real question, I said. When the lawyer slid 2 bills across the table and you saw me sitting there with nothing, who stood up for me? My father waved a hand dismissively. That's not the point. It is, I said. It's the only point. Breck laughed again, but it was thinner this time. Oh, come on, he said. You're really going to play the victim card now? I didn't say a word that day, I replied. You laughed. He smiled. She couldn't look at me. And now you're standing in my kitchen talking about fairness. My mother's eyes filled quickly like they always did when pressure rose. Stellan, please, she said. You know your brother has plans, investments, responsibilities. This money could help all of us. There it was. The ask. Finally uncloaked. My father straightened. We're not asking, he said. We're telling you to do the right thing. Split it. Keep the peace. The words hung in the air, heavy and familiar. For years, keeping the peace had always meant one thing: me stepping back so they didn't have to. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Adair had given me. I placed it on the table between us, slow and deliberate. What's that? Breck asked. Documentation, I said. Confirmation that the trust is being established exactly as my grandfather instructed. My father's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to my face. You planned this? No, I said. He did. I opened the folder and slid the top page toward them. Not aggressively, not defensively, like I was placing a fact on the table and letting it speak for itself. These assets, I continued, are separate. They're not part of the estate you received. They're not subject to family negotiation or moral bargaining. My father's expression hardened. You think a piece of paper scares me? I think you know what it means, I replied. Breck leaned forward and squinted at the page. You really went all the way to Savannah Heritage for this, he said casually. Even talked to Langford. The room went still. I looked at him. Say that again. He shrugged too quickly. Relax. Everyone knows Langford's the guy. The box wasn't even in probate. Not exactly subtle. My pulse stayed steady, but something clicked into place. They hadn't just guessed. They'd been looking. Early. I met my father's eyes. You started digging before the funeral. His silence answered for him. You didn't even wait for the will, I said. You were already hunting. My mother whispered my name like a warning. My father's voice dropped. Be careful. No, I said. I've been careful my whole life. He straightened, authority returning like a reflex. If you don't share this, he said, we'll challenge it. Legally. I nodded once. You can try. Breck scoffed. You're bluffing. I'm not, I said. There's a clause. Any attempt to dispute or undermine my grandfather's intent risks your inheritance. That did it. Breck's grin vanished completely. My mother's breath caught. My father didn't move, but I saw the calculation flash behind his eyes. Risk, loss, consequence. For the first time since they walked in, none of them spoke. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. I already am, I said. They stood there for a moment longer, measuring me against the version of me they thought they knew. Then my father turned toward the door. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, I replied. Breck muttered something under his breath, something meant to sting but lacking its usual confidence. My mother lingered, torn between pleading and punishment, then followed them out. The door closed behind them. The apartment fell silent, not peaceful, not yet. But something had shifted, and I knew it wasn't over. The silence after they left didn't last. It never does. For a day my phone stayed quiet, no calls, no messages, no sudden appearances. just enough calm to make me wonder if I'd imagined the intensity of it all. Then the other things started. At work, conversations stopped when I entered the room. A manager asked if I had a minute, then spoke in careful phrases about distractions and external issues. An email circulated that didn't mention my name but described a situation a little too close to my own. Someone had sent a packet. No return address, no signature. Inside were printed pages. Accusations dressed up as concern. Phrases like questionable inheritance manipulation of an elderly relative, irregular estate handling. Not enough to be actionable on their own. Enough to plant doubt. I didn't need to ask who sent it. When I got home that night, I noticed something else. I'd been removed from the family group chat. My name disappeared from the shared calendar. Birthdays passed without messages. Holidays came and went without a word. It was punishment, clean and quiet. I sat on my couch and stared at my phone longer than I should have, wondering if this was the cost of finally saying no. The next morning I went back to Adair. She didn't look surprised when I laid the anonymous packet on her desk. She flipped through it quickly, expression sharpening. "This is escalation," she said. "Predictable." I pulled out the sealed envelope my grandfather had left, the one Mr. Langford told me to open only if they began pressuring me. My hands shook slightly as I placed it in front of her. "I think it's time," I said. She nodded. "Let's see what he prepared." Inside was a second layer of planning. Clear steps. Instructions on documenting harassment, on preserving messages, on responding without engaging. And then the part that made Adair sit back in her chair. "There's a behavioral clause here," she said slowly. "It ties the distribution of their inheritance to their conduct." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, "that if they attempt to coerce, harass, defame, or pressure you into altering your decisions, their assets can be flagged for review or restriction." I exhaled, shaky. He really thought of everything. "He thought of them," she corrected gently. A day later, Adair called me with an update from the bank. There were signs of unauthorized access attempts. Not a breach, a person. Someone willing to bend rules for the right incentive, not the institution. A human weak point. That night I checked the hallway cameras in my building. I watched the footage from the evening my family showed up. They'd arrived early. They stood just out of frame for several minutes waiting. Watching. This hadn't been a conversation. It had been a coordinated move. I returned to Adair the next morning and told her I was ready. "Then we stop reacting," she said. "And we move." We finalized the trust, added protections, restricted access, documented everything, messages, voicemails, the packet at work, the footage from my building. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment with the two $50 bills laid out on the table. For the first time, I understood my grandfather's words completely. The truth lives where no one looks until someone decides to bring it into the light, and I was done hiding it. By the time the sun came up the next morning, I wasn't running on anger anymore. I was running on clarity. Adair had told me the truth, the way people like her always do, without drama, without comfort. The longer I waited, the more chances they'd have to build a story around me. A story where I was unstable, greedy, manipulative. Anything but what I actually was, a man who finally stopped shrinking. So I stopped treating this like a family argument and started treating it like what it had become: harassment, interference, and an attempt to force an outcome through pressure. Adair's office smelled like black coffee and fresh paper, and for the first time in weeks, that scent didn't feel sterile. It felt safe. She spread everything across her conference table in a clean line, screenshots of the anonymous texts with the exact numbers, call logs that looked like a coordinated campaign, the packet delivered to my workplace, the hallway camera footage showing my father and brother arriving early and waiting out of frame, and my written statement page after page in my own words, written plain and chronological, so nobody could accuse me of rewriting my emotions after the fact. I'd written about the will reading in Savannah's historic district, about the two crisp bills sliding across the table, about my father's smile and Breck's laugh, about my mother's eyes refusing to meet mine. I'd written about the bank, the verification marks, Mr. Langford locking the door and changing his entire posture the moment he recognized what my grandfather had designed. I'd written about the moment the calls began and the moment my family showed up at my apartment like they were stepping into property. Adair read my statement once without interruption, then placed it back in front of me. "Good," she said. "It's not emotional. It's factual. It shows pattern." "What happens now?" I asked. "We file," she said. "Emergency hearing request. Protective measures. We force the timeline into the open." The word open made my chest tighten. I'd spent most of my life surviving by staying quiet and staying out of sight. But my grandfather hadn't built that system so I could hide behind it. He built it so I could stand in front of it without getting crushed. Adair made one call while I sat there, hands folded, listening to her voice shift into the calm authority people automatically obey when they hear it. Then she hung up and looked at me. "Court tomorrow," she said. "Morning docket." I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid of them exactly. Because I was finally awake to what they were capable of and to what I was. The next morning I walked into the courthouse in Savannah with Adair beside me. The building wasn't grand, but it carried its own weight marble that had seen thousands of people try to tell their version of the truth, fluorescent lights that didn't flatter anyone, and security lines that reminded you the law was not a suggestion. It was a boundary if you knew how to claim it. In the hallway outside the courtroom I saw them. My father stood with a lawyer I didn't recognize, older, expensive suit, the kind of face that practiced sympathy like a tool. My mother sat on a bench with her purse clutched tightly in her lap, wearing grief on her face, the way she wore it at the funeral, perfectly timed, perfectly visible. Breck leaned against the wall, jaw working, trying to look bored, trying to look above it all. My father's eyes cut to mine. For a second I saw the old version of him, certain, entitled, expecting me to fold just because he was watching. Then his gaze flicked to Adair and his mouth tightened. He didn't nod. He didn't pretend warmth. He simply watched, calculating. Adair didn't slow down. She didn't acknowledge them. She guided me to a chair near the courtroom door and lowered her voice. "Whatever they say in there," she murmured, "you stay steady. Let me do the arguing. You answer questions. Nothing extra." I nodded. The bailiff called us in. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Wood benches. A judge's bench raised just enough to make you feel the power difference. Flags in the corner. A court reporter hunched over a machine ready to translate every word into a record no one could later deny. My father's lawyer stood first. He opened with a soft voice and a concerned face, the way people do when they're about to weaponize care. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a grieving family in turmoil. My client's son is experiencing heightened agitation after receiving what he believes was an unfair share in a will. He is now attempting to Adair stood before he could build momentum. Objection to characterization," she said smoothly. "This is not a hearing about feelings or inheritance fairness. This is a hearing about documented harassment, coercive conduct, and interference following the discovery of assets held outside probate assets my client has legal authority over. We have evidence. We have timestamps. We have patterns." The judge's eyes shifted toward Adair. "Proceed," the judge said. Adair didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid the facts down like bricks. She presented the call logs first, multiple unknown numbers clustered in narrow windows repeating over days. Then the text messages that weren't rumors but precise figures and terms: deposit box trust 30 million. Then the anonymous packet delivered to my employer. Then the footage from my apartment building showing my father and brother arriving early and waiting like hunters who didn't want to knock until they were sure I was cornered. My father's lawyer tried to interrupt twice, but the judge held up a hand. Then Adair looked at me and nodded. "Mr. Rook," she said, "tell the court what happened at the will reading." My throat went tight, but I kept my voice level. "I sat at the far end of the table," I said. "That's where I always sit." My father took the head seat. My mother sat beside him. My brother came in last. No one spoke to me. The attorney read their inheritances, millions. When he read mine, it was $50. My father smiled. My brother laughed. My mother wouldn't look at me. I didn't say anything. I took the bills and left. My father's lawyer shifted, ready to pounce on the word, smiled like it was drama. But I kept going. 3 days after I confirmed something at my grandfather's bank, I continued. I began receiving messages and calls from unknown numbers. The messages contained details that weren't public and weren't guesses. Then my father, mother, and brother arrived at my apartment without asking and attempted to pressure me to give them control over assets they have no legal claim to. The judge leaned slightly forward. Did they threaten you? They threatened legal action, I said. They implied consequences if I didn't keep the peace. After that, I received a packet at work accusing me of wrongdoing anonymously, and I discovered they were waiting outside my door before they knocked. The room was quiet except for the court reporter's machine. Adair stood again and addressed the judge. Your Honor, there's another critical component, she said. We contacted Savannah Heritage Bank for confirmation regarding security concerns because the level of detail in these messages indicates unlawful access to protected information. My father's lawyer stiffened. Adair handed up a document. The judge read for a moment, then looked up. This states there was an attempted inquiry about a private deposit box shortly after the decedent's death, the judge said. Denied due to lack of verification. My stomach tightened as the words filled the room. My grandfather's prediction spoken out loud in a courtroom. Adair nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And it also states there were internal irregularities, unauthorized searches tied to the decedent's profile. My father's lawyer raised his hand, voice sharpening. Your Honor, my clients deny any improper. The judge lifted a hand. Counsel let her finish. Adair's gaze remained calm. The bank conducted an internal review, she said. They identified the individual responsible for the unauthorized lookups. His name is Caleb Drayton. My father went still. Not the subtle stillness of annoyance, the stillness of recognition. Adair continued. Mr. Drayton is a contract data specialist who had access to customer profile systems. The bank's counsel is prepared to attest that Mr. Drayton accessed information outside protocol and that the data he accessed aligns with the details that later appeared in messages and communications directed at my client. My father's lawyer tried to speak again, but the judge's eyes had moved to my father. Mr. Rook, the judge said, do you know this individual? My father's jaw clenched. I don't know what you're implying. Adair didn't blink. We're not implying, Your Honor. We're establishing a pathway. Mr. Drayton's records show contacts with a phone number registered to a business line associated with Mr. Clay Rook's office. That was the moment the air changed. Breck's posture shifted. My mother's eyes widened. My father's face tightened like a mask being pulled too hard. My father's lawyer turned toward him, whispering something, but my father stared straight ahead, refusing to look at anyone. Adair didn't press for a confession. She didn't need to. The evidence was the pressure. The pressure was the point. Then Adair reached for the final piece. Your Honor, she said my client's grandfather included a behavioral condition tied to the inheritances distributed through the will. The intent was to protect my client from coercion and harassment. The condition states that if beneficiaries engage in intimidation, harassment, defamation, or coercive conduct designed to influence my client's decisions regarding assets held outside probate, their distributions may be subject to restriction and review according to the structure the decedent established. My father's lawyer jumped up. That's not... The judge held up a hand again. Is this condition documented? The judge asked. Adair handed up the relevant pages, signed and dated, and referenced the mechanism that allowed enforcement through the trust structure and the estate plan. The judge read, then read again. When the judge looked up, my father finally moved just a fraction. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time since the will reading, I watched my father realize that the rules were written by the one man he couldn't bully anymore. The judge spoke evenly. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said this court will issue interim protective measures. No direct contact with Mr. Stellan Rook. All communication if necessary through counsel. Any further harassment or interference will carry consequences. Additionally, the documentation regarding the behavioral condition and the bank's internal findings will be preserved in the record. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something quieter, like a door had closed behind me, not to trap me, but to keep them from dragging me backward. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was crowded with people who had their own crises, their own stories. We stepped into it, and the noise rushed in. Footsteps, murmured conversations, the squeak of shoes on tile. My father moved toward me immediately, anger breaking through his restraint. "This is insane," he hissed. "You're humiliating your mother. You're destroying this family." Adair stepped between us so fast it almost startled me. "Mr. Rook," she said clearly, loud enough that nearby heads turned, "you are not to approach him. The court's instructions are explicit." My father stopped, chest rising and falling, eyes burning. He looked like a man standing outside a locked door, furious that it wouldn't open just because he demanded it. Breck scoffed, trying to salvage confidence. "Congrats," he muttered. "You got your little show." I turned my head toward him. "You weren't laughing at the will reading because it was funny," I said quietly. "You were laughing because you thought it proved I'd always be beneath you." His lips curled. "You want the truth," he said. "We knew there was something. Nobody leaves $50 unless they're signaling something. Dad said the bank would have it, we just didn't know you'd figure it out first." Adair's eyes snapped to him. "Thank you," she said, voice flat. Breck blinked. "What you just confirmed intent," Adair replied and walked me forward without waiting for another word. My mother stood at the edge of the hallway, tears on her cheeks. "Stellan," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please. We can still fix this." I looked at her. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I couldn't ignore the simplest truth: she didn't come to my apartment to ask if I was okay. She came when there was money in the air. "I'm not fixing this," I said softly. "I'm ending it." We walked out into the bright Savannah morning. The sunlight felt almost wrong after the courthouse lights. Adair guided me to her car, and as I got in, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. One line. "This isn't over." I stared at the screen for a second, then placed the phone face down. For the first time, his words didn't land like a threat. They landed like a confession of how little power he had left. A week later, I sat in Adair's office with a pen in my hand, staring at the line where my signature would go. It was a simple thing, ink on paper, but I could feel the difference in my body. I used to sign documents to end discomfort, to make a conversation stop, to avoid conflict, to get out of rooms where my voice didn't matter. This time I was signing to protect myself. Adair slid the final trust documents across the desk. "This locks it," she said. "Anonymous structure, strict access controls, and a clear pathway for enforcement if anyone attempts coercion again. Communication through counsel only, no exceptions." I nodded and signed. My name looked the same as it always had, but it felt different. It felt like it belonged to someone who wouldn't be moved by a smile, a laugh, or a tear. When I finished, Adair gathered the pages, clipped them neatly, and placed them into a file. "You did what your grandfather wanted you to do," she said. "You stood up without turning into what they tried to paint you as." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I believed I'd done anything heroic. I'd simply done what I had to do to breathe. On my way out, Adair handed me an envelope. "This came in from the bank," she said. "Final summary, and something else." At home, I opened it at my kitchen table. The bank's letter was direct. It confirmed the internal investigation findings, confirmed that Caleb Drayton's access was unauthorized, confirmed disciplinary action, and noted that records had been preserved. It didn't say my father's name, but it didn't need to. The pathway had been documented. The timeline was now a matter of record, not rumor. Underneath the bank's letter was a smaller note from Mr. Langford. Short, precise. "Mr. Rook, your grandfather anticipated human weakness. He told us to expect pressure. I'm sorry you experienced it. The bank has taken action. You are secure." Beneath that, a final line in Mr. Langford's careful handwriting. "He would be proud you didn't flinch." I stared at that sentence until my eyes stung. Then my phone buzzed again. My mother. A long message. Soft words. Vague regret. a request to talk like a family, a reminder of how hard this has been for everyone. A minute later, my father sent another message, shorter, colder. "We can handle this privately. Call me." Breck didn't write at all. His silence was its own kind of message. I didn't reply to any of them, not because I was punishing them, because I'd finally learned the difference between conversation and control. If they wanted access to me, they could go through the one place they hated losing to the law. 2 days later, I drove out to my grandfather's old house. Not the one the family posed in front of when there were cameras, but the one he actually lived in, the place that smelled like old books and polished wood and black coffee that had cooled in a mug while he thought through numbers. The river sat nearby, steady and indifferent. Savannah always had that quality, the feeling that time moved whether you begged it to stop or not. Inside, everything was exactly where I remembered it. The chair by the window, the desk with the tight handwriting columns of numbers like a private language, the faint creak in the floorboard near the hallway that my grandfather used to avoid without thinking. I walked to the chair and sat down slowly. For a long time, I didn't do anything. I just listened to the house settle, the soft hum of quiet, the kind of quiet my grandfather respected. My mind replayed the sequence like a chain, the will reading the $50, the marks, the bank, the box, the letters, the calls, the apartment, the packet at work, the courthouse, the name Caleb Drayton, the look on my father's face when the judge held up the documents. My grandfather hadn't designed a puzzle for entertainment. He'd designed a test of character. He gave me $50 because it would hurt. Not because he wanted me to suffer, but because he knew that if it didn't hurt enough, I would go right back to being easy. Right back to being quiet in a way that erased me. Right back to accepting humiliation as the cost of belonging. He needed the moment to be undeniable. He needed me to see who they were when they thought I had nothing. And he needed me to see who I could be when I refused to beg. I opened the drawer of his desk and found a small envelope tucked beneath a stack of yellowed notes. My breath caught when I saw my name. Stellan. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a reveal meant for anyone else. It was a final kindness hidden where only I would bother to look. Inside was one page folded once. "If you found this, it means you came here when the noise got loud." I smiled, small, involuntary, because that was him, plain-spoken, certain, never wasting words. You don't owe anyone your life just because they share your blood. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they call it peace. He had underlined the last word lightly, like he did in his notes when something mattered. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. My throat tightened. I read the next line slowly. Keep your life simple on the outside. Keep it strong on the inside. Let the law handle what your heart can't fix. And don't confuse guilt with love. At the bottom, he'd written one final sentence in the same steady hand. When you stop asking permission to exist, you become impossible to control. I held the paper against my palm for a moment, then folded it back and placed it carefully in my jacket pocket. When I left the house, I didn't feel high. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Back in my apartment, life didn't transform into a movie ending. My job was still my job. My mornings still started with coffee. The world still moved. But something inside me had been rewired. I kept the trust quiet. I didn't buy a bigger place. I didn't post anything online. I didn't let money become a new kind of noise. I built a plan with a dare that honored my grandfather's spirit, steady investments, long-term security, privacy. A life that didn't broadcast itself just to prove something to people who would never be satisfied anyway. My father tried a few more times. His messages shifted from threats to bargaining. My mother's messages shifted from pleading to wounded silence. Breck eventually sent one line that tried to sound casual. "So you're really going to do this forever?" I never answered. Instead, I kept a file. I kept dates. I kept evidence. And I kept my boundaries so clean they couldn't pretend they didn't see them. One night, I took the two $50 bills out and laid them on my table the way I did in the parking garage under the law office. Under a lamp, the marks were still there, faint and deliberate. I didn't see them as humiliation anymore. I saw them as the moment my life changed direction. My grandfather didn't leave me $50. He left me sight. He left me a way to understand what silence had been doing to me all those years, how it had protected me, yes, but also how it had made me disappear for other people's comfort. Now silence meant something else. It wasn't the place where I vanished. It was the place where I belonged to myself. I folded the bills carefully and put them away, not as money, but as proof of the day I stopped being easy to handle. And for the first time in my life, I went to sleep without waiting for anyone's permission to be at peace. Stories like Stellan's don't end with a courtroom door closing. They end in the quieter places when a person finally stops shrinking and discovers that peace isn't something you win, it's something you protect. We can hold compassion without excusing harm. We can tell the truth without turning it into revenge. And sometimes the bravest thing is simply choosing boundaries even when it feels lonely at first, and letting time prove what love really was. Maybe that's the real takeaway for all of us. When people only reach for you when there's something to take, it's okay to step back. We don't have to punish anyone to move on. We just have to stop offering ourselves up as the price of keeping the peace. If you felt something in this confession, you're not alone. If you'd like to keep listening with us, more stories, more hard truths, more gentle reminders that we can start over, subscribe and stay close. It's less about a button, more about joining a space where people are allowed to heal out loud. And if you want to leave a few words in the comments where you're listening from, or the moment that hit you the most. Thanks for being here with us. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next